at dawn, the building was surrounded by German soldiers who came into all the rooms, ordering everybody out to be taken to the train station. And my mother pleaded with the soldier who came into the room where they were to leave my sister behind. The people in power are pursuing a very anti-foreigners, anti-immigrants, anti-asylum seekers agenda, an extreme agenda, and often use language which I find extremely disturbing because it reminds me of the kind of language that was used in the 1930s about Jews even. Effectively, the family had two flats, but the third was taken by a German officer. And they were afraid that this officer might tweak to the fact that I was a Jewish child being hidden. And of course, if discovered, I probably would have been killed pretty quickly. I'm Uri Winterstein. I'm a survivor of the genocide commonly referred to as the Holocaust.
You were born in 1943 in what's now Slovakia. Can you tell us about the situation there when you were born?
Well, Czechoslovakia, by the time I was born, had been split by the Germans effectively into two countries, which were known generally as the protectorates of Bohemia Moravia and the protectorate of Slovakia. And I was born in Bratislava, the capital of Slovakia. Now, Slovakia was actually an ally of the Germans. So contrary to some of the countries in Europe, it wasn't conquered. It was ruled by a party with a very similar vision, including very much the anti-Semitism of the Nazi party. And so we found ourselves in this terrible situation from even before the war began, because the split happened in March 1939. And the first of the anti-Jewish legislation in Slovakia started to be passed in April 1939. So it actually predates the war. Yeah.
That must have been terrifying as a Jewish family and for your parents. And I was wondering if they ever talked to you about the events that preceded and made the Holocaust possible. Like, were they aware of rising anti-Semitism and dehumanization?
Right. First of all, my parents, very much like many survivors, hardly spoke about that time. So I sometimes thought maybe it was protecting me because although I was born during the war and in effect, my life was in danger, I never knew that time. I never had the terror that, like my sister, who was 6 years older, would have experienced. But my parents were very aware of the anti-Semitism. There was unfortunately a lot of anti-Semitism going back decades even. My father, although professionally he was a lawyer and had a very successful practice, his real passion was the welfare of the Jewish community. He was heavily involved in Jewish organizations from his youth onwards. And so he was very aware of that. In the mid-1930s, he campaigned in the national elections. He didn't consider himself a political man, but the Slovak People's Party, which is the party that echoed very much the Nazi lines, their anti-Semitism was so blatant that my father got involved in trying to push back against them, let's say. So yes, they were very aware of the dangers, and they never spoke to me. But as an adult, I can imagine that their thoughts heavily, particularly once the war started, were just simply on survival.
You mentioned your dad's activism there, and I was wondering if you could speak a bit more about the working group that he was part of during the war.
Well, the working group was an informal group, wasn't formally structured or had a leadership or whatever, of 9 Jews, but it was effectively led by 2 of them, a Rabbi Dov Weismandel and a woman, Gizzy Fleischman, who for me is one of the unsung heroines of the war. She very sadly was picked up by the Gestapo in 1944 and sent to Auschwitz with specific orders to be killed. But the work, I believe, that the working group did saved many lives. I think the chief accomplishment, there were a number of things that they managed to do, but the biggest of all for me was stopping the deportation of the Slovak Jews for almost 2 years, from October 1942 to late September 1944. And that was accomplished by bribing the key German and Slovak officials involved, and particularly SS officer Dieter Wisličený, who was nominally an advisor to the Slovak government on Jewish matters, but actually the man, of course, calling the shots.
It's incredible bravery, and it must have placed your father in some danger. And your parents found themselves in 1943 with you as a baby. And I was wondering if you could tell us about the actions they took to keep you safe.
Yes, they realized, I mean, because they were aware of this danger, they knew that if the danger became very imminent, they would have to go into hiding. So they always had a plan in their back pockets to go into hiding. However, they realized that it would be impossible or very difficult, let's say, to hide with a baby. Certainly in researches, I found a couple of instances where people were hiding with very small infants, where they accidentally actually suffocated them because they were trying to keep them quiet when a German army search was going on near. My mother explained to me that it was difficult to explain to my sister that she would have to be quiet when they were in hiding and the search was underway near where they were. But absolutely impossible with a baby. So their plan, which they obviously conceived before I was even born, was to give me to a non-Jewish, I didn't know at the time who they gave me to, but it turns out to be a family, a non-Jewish family. So when I was a month old, they gave me into the care of this family.
Could you tell us a bit about what happened then?
When I was with this other family, well, of course, all I can tell you is what I was told, because I have no memories myself. But my sister told me fairly recently, she remembered going with my parents to visit me once, and that they found me being well taken care of, that this family was clearly very good to me, which was not always the case, I know. But that they expressed concern because they lived in a building in which effectively the family had two flats, but the third was taken by a German officer. And they were afraid that this officer might tweak to the fact that I was a Jewish child being hidden. And of course, if discovered, I probably would have been killed pretty quickly, but they would have been in serious trouble. Hiding Jews was a very serious crime. So I cannot tell you how full of admiration. Sorry, I am for what they did, which was very, very brave. Sorry.
It's incredibly brave.
It was incredible. And when I learned, the only thing I knew about them when I was growing up is my mother told me when I was somewhere around 8, 9 years old, that my father knew a Sudeten German woman who was a journalist, and they gave me for safekeeping to this woman. That's all I really knew. I then surmised there was a family, etc., but I really didn't know anything. And I never had a way of finding out who these people were when I was an adult. First of all, I wasn't even living there, and so on. And miraculously, thanks to the internet, they found me in 2019. The son of the family I was with, who is virtually exactly my age, and my first playmate, effectively, because I was with him. He found me, and I thought not only how brave they were, but here they were. They had a son. I say to myself, maybe if I was a single person, would I be brave enough to hide someone? You never know the answer till you're in a situation. I'd like to think so, but who knows? But to have a family, to have your own child and take that risk. And they not only saved me, they saved another boy and they saved 3 adult men as well. So uh, they were incredible. Yeah.
The actions of them and of your parents kept you safe. And I was wondering if you
Yes.
could speak a bit about what was happening to your parents during the time that you were in their care.
Yes, my parents, on the whole, were managing day to day. There was a period where, actually, that probably took place before I was born, where my father had to go into hiding because there was an order out for his arrest. But if I look at after my birth, in 1944, uh, there was a popular uprising in Slovakia in August, and it took the German army to quell that rebellion, and the Germans now took direct control of the government at that stage. And the Adolf Eichmann had sent a new man then at that point to replace Dieter Wusliceni, SS officer Alois Brummer, who was a true diehard anti-Semite, and announced on his arrival in September 44 that his priority was getting rid of all the Jews that remained in Slovakia. And he ordered the Jews in Bratislava to be housed in selected apartment buildings to make it easy to not only control them, but more importantly, I think, to take them to a train station when a train arrived for deportation. By then, the war was going very badly, and I don't think they would have known when a train was coming. It would have to be quick. So my parents and my sister were moved into a room in one of these buildings. And my parents discussed that evening that they should put their plan to go into hiding the next day. But, luck plays a big role in life. And as luck would have it, in the middle of the night, a train arrived for deportation. And at dawn, the building was surrounded by German soldiers who came into all the rooms, ordering everybody out to be taken to the train station. And my mother pleaded with the soldier who came into the room where they were to leave my sister behind. My sister was 7 years old, and my parents thought she had a better chance of survival being left than going with them into a camp. And to my great surprise, when I heard this, the soldier didn't just say, "Shut up and get on with it." He said, "Well, I have to ask my superior officer." And this officer actually showed some humanity, because he not only acceded to my mother's request, he actually went further. He said, "Who will take care of the girl?" So he said, "We'll leave the mother as well." So on that occasion, my father was taken, but my mother and sister were allowed to stay. One of the soldiers turned around as they were leaving and said, "We will catch you later." But my parents and sister are all convinced that that act of humanity saved my sister's life, that she would not have survived had she been taken at that point in time to a camp, that extra time. And on that day, my mother and sister then were on a tram going to the hiding place, and they were traveling with a friend of my father's, Dr. Ernst Abeles, who was also on the working group. And my mother said she got nervous about a German soldier she thought was staring at them. So she said, "Let's just get off at the next stop to get rid of him." And when they got off, however, he followed, and now he demanded to see their identification papers. And while Abeles was fumbling in his pockets to find his papers, my mother grabbed my sister's hand and said, "Run." And they ran as quickly as they could. And my sister told me once I was talking at schools here that she was afraid the soldier was going to shoot. He had a rifle. So she looked, and she said he was just looking bemused. And he obviously thought it was a family, because he turned around to Abeles and said, You better go join your wife and daughter. Although he also added those words, we'll catch you later. Nevertheless, another act of humanity. So on that day, my mother and sister had two very close calls, but were able to go into hiding in a bunker with Abelis and a number of other Jews who were hiding there. So how lucky do you get? But their luck eventually ran out because a young woman in hiding with them wrote a letter to her boyfriend, which was intercepted by the Gestapo. And they now knew where the hiding place was. And this time there was no escape. So my mother and sister ended up being deported then as well. Sorry. And they actually met up with my father in a labor camp, a slave labor camp in Slovakia called Seret. But they were almost immediately then sent, all three of them, to Theresienstadt, which was a concentration camp in what's now the Czech Republic, near the border of Poland, with train transport to Poland, etc. So it was a conduit to Auschwitz and to other camps from there. So I don't know how much you want me to say of what I know of their time in the camp, but they were then in a camp until the end of the war. And when I knew all of this as a boy, I counted myself very, very lucky because although many people of my family had died in the Holocaust, my immediate family had survived, and I wasn't an orphan. I was aware that I was lucky.
How did it come to be that you were reunited with your family after they had been in Theresienstadt?
Well, my family, as I say, weren't the camp wasn't liberated until the very end of the war. And even then, I understand people weren't allowed to leave camps because the authorities were afraid they might spread diseases. They were all very weak. There were diseases in these camps and they could spread them. So I have no idea how long it took before my parents were able to come to Bratislava. But my aunt, my father's youngest brother's wife, knew where I was hidden at the time. I was no longer with this original family. I was now with a Slovak peasant woman, but she knew where I was. So she's the one who collected me and kept me until my parents and sister were able to return to Bratislava, and I was reunited with them. Now, I was 19 months old at the end of the war, so I have no memory of not being with my family. My earliest childhood memories, are happy memories with loving parents and sister and, a normal kind of life. And I didn't know any of this baggage that I now am aware of at that time.
Today, you've given many talks in schools around Britain, and I was wondering, what is it you want the children to know when you give these talks?
The most important thing that I try to say to the children, in fact, I say to them, I'm not actually here to talk about the past. I want to talk to you about the future of your generation. But talking about the past is a way of trying to alert them to the dangers of society, as I explained to them. If they allow prejudices to harden into hatred and extreme ideologies to flourish, then we end up with situations like ours. So that is a message I want to give them: the need for tolerance in society, the fact that the common humanity we share is so much bigger than any of these divisions that people see. But prejudice has a way of enlarging these divisions, making them seem huge. The only division that I really see are ideological ones. People who spread ideologies of hatred and divide people and set one group of people against another, they're the danger. And that's what I'm trying to alert the children to, and also to the fact that it's a process. something like a genocide does not happen from one day to the next. It needs a process which starts with language to separate the target group from the rest of society, to dehumanize them in the eyes of the rest of the society, so it becomes easier to do the things that then are done to them. So that's really the key message I want to give the kids.
And when you look at the world today, do you think that we as a society have learned the dangers of anti-Semitism?
Until a very few years ago, I thought, and I know my sister thought, many other people thought, that we were making progress. Very, very slow. It was painfully slow, but there was, it seemed, progress. And then suddenly, and it seems to started in 2016 with the Brexit vote in this country, which seemed to give permission to those that have the extreme ideologies and hate to feel that they could come out and start to speak in ways that before that they weren't able to, or didn't feel they had permission to do. And the hate started to spread again. And I felt we're sliding backwards. Now, I like to hang on to something I heard President Obama say a couple of years ago or so, ex-president, of course, but because he was interviewed about the fact that Donald Trump, then the president, was tearing up virtually anything that Obama had touched. And the interviewer was asking him basically how he felt about that. And Obama said, that is how progress happens in the world throughout history. The progressive forces make some progress, then the conservative forces fight back and there's a reaction. But then eventually you start again, and you start actually from a bit higher level. So I would like to hope that's the case, even though what I'm watching is a world that seems to be slipping steadily worse and worse situation. In many, many countries, unfortunately, we see the forces of ultra-nationalism, of hate talk, division of people in so many parts of the world. It's very frightening, and makes it very important to continue to talk to the kids. But I have to say, one of the things that have made the talks for me a pleasure, because originally I really didn't want to do the talks. I felt it was a duty, but I didn't want to do the talks. I was afraid of it. But the kids have been so fantastic and so positive, and they're the future. So I have hope.
You mentioned some of the people that were brave and saved your life and your family's life. And I was wondering, what do you make of the treatment of refugees today and some of the discourse that we hear from people in power towards them?
Right. Well, there's a very big, important division between the people in power and the general public. The people in power are pursuing a very anti-foreigners, anti-immigrants, anti-asylum seekers agenda, an extreme agenda, and often use language which I find extremely disturbing, because it reminds me of the kind of language that was used in the 1930s about Jews even. Because they're talked about as if they're criminals, they're bad people, etc. They're just normal people, many of them running for their lives, others for a better life. And what's wrong with that? This country was made by many immigrants coming over the centuries, who some fleeing for their lives and some for a better life. Neither of those is to be condemned. But when it comes to the general public, what's interesting is I'm aware from one of the charities working with asylum seekers, for example, they said, this was at the time Suella Braverman was the Home Secretary. They said every time she opened her mouth about the asylum seekers and immigrants, they got lots more money. which showed how the general public, there was quite a lot of people who actually don't feel the way the government do. It's a very sad situation. But I'm buoyed by the fact that there are a lot of good people in this country. You don't hear about them so much because the government is who we hear about mostly, but they're there, and they cheer my heart.
Uri Winterstein, thank you so much for talking to us today.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.